The fashion business rewards founding generations who bet everything on instinct, but it punishes their children who try the same approach in markets that have fundamentally changed. What worked in one era, family control, gut-level decision-making, building slowly without outside capital, becomes liability when fast fashion, private equity, and algorithmic trend forecasting reshape entire industries within a decade. 7 families watched this transformation destroy what their founders built. Some borrowed billions, assuming brand loyalty would generate cash flow forever, then discovered consumers had moved on. Others fought succession wars that fragmented decision-making precisely when markets demanded speed. A few gambled entire empires on personal obsessions unrelated to the businesses funding them. The unluckiest simply held on too long, refusing outside capital or professional management, until debt made both irrelevant and creditors dismantled dynasties that had defined luxury for generations. Today we investigate whether fashion empires can survive family control, or whether the very intimacy that builds distinctive brands eventually guarantees their destruction. If you were a teenager in 2010, you remember the yellow shopping bags. You remember the massive stores that seemed to occupy entire wings of your local mall. 90,000 square feet of crop tops, bodycon dresses, and $5 jewelry spread across multiple floors. You remember the fitting room lines that wrapped around clothing racks, the pounding music, and the strange little Bible verse printed on the bottom of every bag. Forever 21 was everywhere. 800 stores across 48 countries, 43,000 employees, $4.4 billion in annual revenue. A family fortune of $5.9 billion built by Korean immigrants who arrived in Los Angeles with $11,000 and no English. By 2025, every single US store had closed. The empire liquidated in 106 days. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we examine how the Chang family built the defining fast fashion brand of a generation, and how the same family control that created it burned it to the ground. At their zenith in 2015, Do-won and Jin-Suk Chang commanded a $5.9 billion fortune, ranking them number 119 on the Forbes 400 and establishing Forever 21 as a $4.4 billion fast fashion empire. They were America's wealthiest Korean immigrants. Their wealth derived from a single source: 99% equity ownership in Forever 21. Unlike competitors who diluted founder control through public offerings or private equity, the Changs maintained absolute authority, rejecting numerous buyout offers and IPO opportunities throughout their expansion. The company's valuation approached $6 billion at its peak, making it one of the largest privately held fashion retailers in the world. Do-won Chang served as CEO and controlled all operational decisions. He personally approved every real estate lease, even after surpassing 500 stores. He scrutinized executive expense reports down to lunch receipts and Uber fares. His private office occupied the upper floor of headquarters, where conversations were hushed and access was restricted. Jin-Suk Chang served as chief merchandising officer and creative force. Her domain was the lower floor, where buyers showed bags to security upon exiting and windows were covered with blinds. The psychology driving such empire building and the family devastation it produces receives extended treatment in our free Substack newsletter, where Dynasties too complex for documentary format reveal what inherited ambition actually costs across generations. The Chang story belongs in that company. The family's primary tangible asset was their Beverly Hills residence at 101 Copley Place, a 6,597 square foot home on a 26,000 square foot lot overlooking the Los Angeles Country Club golf course. They purchased the property on March 28, 2008 for $7,500,000. Current estimates place its value at $20 to $25 million. Despite extensive searches of FAA aircraft registries, yacht databases, and property records, no evidence emerged of Chang family ownership of private jets, yachts, or additional real estate. This absence reflected Do-won's disciplined philosophy. He famously reinvested profits into business expansion rather than personal consumption. Their wealth was entirely concentrated in Forever 21 equity, a decision that would prove catastrophic. The brand's cultural power extended far beyond financial metrics. During its peak from 2005 to 2015, Forever 21 commanded 9 to 10% of US teens' favorite clothing brand preferences, according to Piper Jaffray's Taking Stock with Teens survey. Strategic placement in high-traffic mall locations, including marquee properties on New York's Fifth Avenue and Times Square, amplified this dominance. The decision to print John 3:16 on every shopping bag created a unique brand identity that merged commerce with Christian evangelism. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Every purchase became a quiet act of faith. But the Changs had arrived in America with nothing, and their journey from poverty to billions began at a Los Angeles gas station. Do-won Chang was born on March 20th, 1954 in South Korea, during one of the nation's most turbulent periods. The Korean War had ended only months earlier, leaving the peninsula devastated and divided. Chang grew up in poverty, running a coffee delivery business as a child in Seoul's Myeongdong district to help support his family. He never attended college. Jin-Suk Chang worked as a hairdresser in South Korea, developing an eye for style and trends that would later define Forever 21's merchandise strategy. The couple married young and watched as their country transformed from a war-ravaged nation into an emerging industrial power. Political instability persisted. In 1979, military leader Park Chung-hee was assassinated, plunging the country into uncertainty. Martial law followed. The Changs decided to seek opportunities abroad. In 1981, Do-won and Jin-Suk landed at Los Angeles International Airport after securing green cards through a brief layover in Hawaii. Do-won was 27. Jin-Suk was 25. They arrived with $11,000 in savings, limited English proficiency, and no college degrees. At that time, people in South Korea were not living well, Do-won later reflected in Korean during a rare 2016 Forbes interview. The opportunities were quite limited. The first years in America demanded superhuman effort. Do-won worked 3 simultaneous jobs, often laboring 19 hours per day at $3 per hour. His mornings began before dawn washing dishes and preparing food at a local cafe. Afternoons meant 8-hour shifts at a gas station. Nights ended near midnight cleaning offices in a small janitorial venture he started himself. Jin-Suk contributed by working as a hairdresser. The pivotal insight occurred at the gas pump. Do-won noticed that the people driving the nicest cars were all in the garment business, Korean immigrants who had found their way into fashion, pulling up in Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs. He asked these drivers what they did for a living. This curiosity led him to a position at a clothing store where his work ethic immediately distinguished him. I treated it as if it were my own business, and the owner appreciated my dedication, he remembered. Los Angeles, in the early 1980s, was the epicenter of American garment manufacturing. The city's fashion district employed tens of thousands of workers, many of them Korean immigrants, who had built networks of suppliers, manufacturers, and retailers. Chang immersed himself in this ecosystem, learning the rhythms of wholesale purchasing, trend identification, and retail margins. After 3 years of brutal saving, the Changs had accumulated $11,000. Every dollar represented sacrifice. They were ready to bet everything on a 900-square-foot storefront in Highland Park. The previous owner of that location had generated only $30,000 in annual sales, and the Changs were about to multiply that figure by 23. On April 16, 1984, Do-won and Jin-Suk Chang invested their entire nest egg to open Fashion 21 at 5637 North Figueroa Street in Highland Park, Los Angeles, a modest 900-square-foot space. The location was strategic. Highland Park housed a vibrant Korean-American community, and the Changs understood their target demographic intimately. They sourced merchandise through wholesale closeouts and direct manufacturer purchases, acquiring designs similar to those popular in South Korea, but at significantly reduced prices. First-year revenue hit $700,000. Du Won and Jin Suk worked 16-hour days in the store themselves, learning retail management, customer preferences, and inventory control through direct interaction. Their Christian faith was present from the start. They attended early morning prayers at a local church nearly every day, a practice maintained even at the height of their success. The 1987 rebranding from Fashion 21 to Forever 21 marked a crucial pivot. Du Won explained the philosophy. Old people want to be 21 again, and young people want to be 21 forever. This universal aspiration allowed the brand to transcend its Korean-American niche and capture a broader youth demographic. The first mall-based location opened in Panorama City, California in 1989, nearly 6 times larger than the original Highland Park store. The timing coincided with America's mall culture explosion. Growth accelerated through the 1990s, with the Changs adding new stores at a rate of 1 every 6 months, fueled entirely by reinvested profits. This discipline allowed expansion without diluting family ownership. The 2005 acquisition of Gadzooks for $33 million instantly doubled the store count to 400. Du Won developed a signature real estate strategy, acquiring anchor tenant spaces vacated by bankrupt department stores like Mervyn's, Saks and Dillard's at favorable rates, then transforming them into Forever 21 mega stores. The flagship stores became monuments to fast fashion ambition. The Times Square location spanned 90,000 square feet across 4 stories with 151 fitting rooms. Las Vegas reached 127,000 square feet, the size of an average Target superstore. The largest location ever built stretched to 162,000 square feet, featuring marble tile floors, chandeliers, and curving staircases more befitting luxury retailers than $5 fashion outlets. Store count reached 794 across 48 countries by 2015. Employee headcount hit 43,000. Annual revenue peaked at $4.4 billion. The original Highland Park store remained in operation until 2020, bearing the chain's original Fashion 21 name, a nostalgic reminder that Du Won still personally approved every lease for every new location, even as the empire grew beyond his capacity to manage it. His daughters, Linda and Estée, were being groomed to inherit the company, but grooming and actual transfer of power would prove to be very different things. Forever 21 faced over 50 copyright infringement lawsuits between 2007 and 2019, making it one of the most litigated fashion retailers in history. Diane von Furstenberg sued over copied wrap dress designs. Gwen Stefani's LAMB brand sued over replicated patterns. Travata, Anasui, and Anthropologie all filed claims. The pattern was consistent. Forever 21 would produce near-identical versions of designer items at 5 to 10% of the original price, prompting cease-and-desist letters followed by confidential settlements. Legal fees and settlement costs likely exceeded $50 to $100 million cumulatively. Labor controversies proved equally damaging. A 3-year national boycott, organized by garment workers, began in October 2001, protesting alleged sweatshop conditions. In 2017, the U.S. Department of Labor investigated Los Angeles garment factories supplying Forever 21 and found violations at 85% of visited facilities, ordering $1,300,000 in back wages and damages. Linda and Estée Chang, Du Won and Jin Suk's daughters, were positioned as the next generation of leadership. Linda earned an Ivy League undergraduate degree, worked retail floors during summers, and assumed the role of executive vice president and board member by age 32. Estée earned an Ivy League undergraduate degree, worked merchandising and design teams, and assumed the role of VP of merchandising by age 30. On paper, the succession plan appeared robust. In practice, Du Won never relinquished decision-making authority. Linda's title was Executive VP, but all strategic decisions, real estate leases, capital expenditures, major hires, still required her father's personal approval. Estée held VP of merchandising, but Jin Suk continued to review and override design decisions. The daughters were positioned as successors but operated as subordinates. In 2015, as financial troubles mounted, Do Won and Jin Suk borrowed $5 million each from their daughters' personal trusts at only 2% interest, compared to bank rates of 6 to 8%. The loan was unsecured, meaning creditors would take priority over Linda and Esther in any bankruptcy. This arrangement created catastrophic conflict of interest. The daughters owed fiduciary duties to all Forever 21 stakeholders, yet had lent personal funds to their parents at below-market rates, subordinating those duties to family loyalty. In 2019, Ariana Grande sued Forever 21 for $10 million after the company hired a lookalike model to mimic her Seven Rings music video aesthetic. The marketing team had recommended partnering with Grande in 2014. Management chose Iggy Azalea instead. Eric Gordon, a professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, identified the core problem. Hubris is common among founders, but it can be particularly detrimental if you've enjoyed prolonged success. They lacked a board of directors to provide reality checks. You can remain in your self-created bubble for a long time, but eventually that bubble bursts. The bubble was already deflating, and the international expansion was accelerating the collapse. Forever 21's international footprint exploded from 7 stores in 2005 to 262 stores across 40 countries by 2015, a 37-fold increase in a single decade. The expansion was a financial catastrophe. International operations lost an average of $100 million annually between 2014 and 2018. Stores in Canada, Europe, and Asia collectively bled $10 million per month by 2018 and 2019. Spain, Belgium, Netherlands, Ireland, and Germany were abandoned after losses exceeding $40 million in 2016 alone. Thailand, Taiwan, Japan, and India followed. Canada was exited entirely, despite proximity and similar demographics to US operations. The root causes were profound misunderstandings of local markets. German stores opened without anyone realizing German retailers close on Sundays, eliminating 1/7 of potential revenue. European wage standards ran 3 to 5 times higher than US levels, making retail operations structurally unprofitable at Forever 21's price points. Digital strategy proved equally disastrous. E-commerce generated only 16% of Forever 21's sales in 2018, compared to industry leaders commanding 30 to 40%. Online inventory was invisible in physical stores. Customers standing in a Forever 21 location could not check if an item was in stock at a warehouse or another store. H&M prided itself on bringing new designs to market in 7 weeks. Forever 21's supply chain took 20 weeks from concept to store delivery. In fast fashion, a 13-week lag is fatal. Trends shift entirely within that time frame. McKinsey was hired in 2015 and recommended complete overhaul of inventory systems and mobile investment. Forever 21 implemented 15% of the recommendations. Bain recommended halting European expansion in 2014. Forever 21 opened 23 new European stores over the following 2 years. Boston Consulting Group recommended centralizing purchasing and reducing the supplier base from over 200 to 75 core suppliers. Forever 21 maintained the decentralized model. The Changs paid millions for expert advice they refused to follow. Store formats had become crushing liabilities. 70 locations exceeding 35,000 square feet, with combined annual occupancy costs approaching $450 million. 6 leases signed for former Mervyn's locations would not expire until 2027 and 2028, locking the company into oversized spaces as mall traffic collapsed. Gen Z preferences were shifting fundamentally. Fenty Beauty launched with 40 foundation shades, exposing Forever 21's limited range as exclusionary. The clean beauty movement made Forever 21's formulations look toxic to younger buyers. Kylie Cosmetics and digitally native brands sold community and authenticity. Forever 21 sold $5 tops that fell apart after 3 washes. On September 30th, 2019, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, citing $1,580 million in debt and announcing plans to close stores in 40 countries, but the restructuring would only delay the final collapse by 6 years. The 2019 bankruptcy announced closure of up to 178 US stores and complete exit from 40 countries. Germany, Spain, Belgium, Netherlands, Ireland, France, Japan, Thailand, Taiwan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all gone. In February 2020, a consortium of Authentic Brands Group, Simon Property Group, and Brookfield Property Partners acquired Forever 21's operating company for $81 million. The price represented a 98.2% discount from the $4.4 billion implied valuation at peak. The Chang's 99% stake had been worth approximately $5.8 billion in 2015. In 2020, that same stake was worth approximately $80 million. The restructuring marked the permanent end of family control. Do-won and Jin Suk were forced to cede operational authority to Spark Group, retaining no board seats, no operational roles, and no voting rights. The daughter's $10 million loan was classified as unsecured debt. They recovered approximately 18 cents per dollar, losing $8,200,000. Despite 5 years of restructuring under new ownership, Forever 21 never recovered. In 2023, Shein acquired a 1/3 stake in Spark Group. Pop-ups were installed in select Forever 21 stores. Forever 21 merchandise was listed on Shein's marketplace. Shein customers could return online orders at Forever 21 locations. The partnership failed across every dimension. Brian Gildenberg, CEO of Confluencer Commerce, summarized, "Forever 21 thought standing next to Shein would make them relevant again. But partnerships don't matter if the core product, strategy, and execution aren't there." More than 11% of invoices were over 91 days late by November 2024. Manufacturers in China, Vietnam, and South Korea received payment delays of 60 to 90 days, forcing some to halt shipments entirely. Store closing sales commenced February 14, 2025. Official bankruptcy filing came March 16th. All 354 US stores closed by April 30th, ahead of the originally projected May 1st deadline. 354 stores liquidated in 106 days. The Los Angeles corporate headquarters was permanently shuttered, with 358 employees laid off. The Chang family's fortune had evaporated. $5.9 billion in 2015, $1.6 billion in 2019. Billionaire status lost entirely in 2020, $500 to $800 million by 2025, primarily the Beverly Hills mansion. Du Wanchang noticed something at a gas station in 1981. He built an empire on that observation. He lost that empire because he stopped noticing anything that contradicted what he already believed. The yellow shopping bags are gone now. The Bible verses printed on the bottom live only in memory. The stores that once occupied entire wings of American malls stand empty, waiting for the next tenant. If you walked through a mall in 1990, you saw the rainbow. Stacks of sweaters in every color imaginable: canary yellow, electric blue, emerald green, hot pink, arranged like a painter's palette against crisp white walls. United colors of Benetton. The stores were everywhere. 7,000 locations across 120 countries. The ads were impossible to miss. A priest kissing a nun, a newborn baby still attached to its umbilical cord, models of every ethnicity posing together in colorful knitwear. Whether you found them profound or offensive, you remembered them. That was the point. At their peak, the four Benetton siblings generated over $2 billion in annual revenue and amassed a fortune that placed each among the world's billionaires. They owned a Formula One racing team that won championships with Michael Schumacher. They controlled 2/3 of Italy's toll highways. They ran the world's largest chain of roadside restaurants. By 2024, the fashion company was hemorrhaging €230 million in a single year. Stores were closing by the hundreds. And the family name was no longer associated with colourful knitwear. It was associated with 43 people dead on a bridge they were supposed to maintain. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we examine how 4 siblings who sold an accordion and a bicycle to buy a knitting machine built one of fashion's great empires, and how that empire became Italy's national disgrace. At their zenith in the late 1990s, the 4 Benetton siblings, Luciano, Giuliana, Gilberto and Carlo, commanded a fashion empire without equal. 7,000 stores worldwide by 1999. Over $2 billion in annual revenue. 120 million garments produced annually at their Castrette facility in Treviso, Italy. Forbes would later estimate each sibling's net worth at $2.9 billion. The psychology driving such empire building, and the family devastation it produces, receives extended treatment in our free Substack newsletter, where dynasties too complex for documentary format reveal what inherited ambition actually costs across generations. The Benetton story belongs in that company. Through Edizione SPA, their holding company, the 4 siblings maintained 100% ownership of Benetton Group. Each held an equal 25% stake. The arrangement was clean. Luciano served as chairman and visionary marketer. Giuliana designed the collections. Gilberto handled financial and real estate investing, and Carlo managed production and liaison between headquarters and factories. The fashion empire was merely one asset in a sprawling portfolio. Their Benetton Formula racing team competed in 260 Formula One races, won 27 Grand Prix victories, and captured 2 consecutive drivers' championships with Michael Schumacher in 1994 and 1995, plus 1 constructors' championship. Through a 30.25% stake in Atlantia SPA, the family controlled the operator of nearly 2/3 of Italy's 4,000 miles of toll highways. They held a 60% stake in Autogrill, the world's leading chain of roadside restaurants and travel food service. They owned stakes in Cellnex Telecom, Assicurazioni Generali Insurance, and Mediobanca. The automated logistics hub at Castrette, designed by architects Tobia and Afra Scarpa and inaugurated in 1984, handled more than 120,000 packages daily, 60,000 incoming and 60,000 outgoing, shipping to over 5,000 outlets around the globe. By 2024, Edizione would achieve consolidated revenues of €10.1 billion and a net asset value of €13.2 billion. The family employed over 100,000 people across their various holdings. The bet on infrastructure paid off brilliantly, everywhere except in the sweater business that made them famous. The siblings who commanded this empire had started with nothing more than a yellow sweater and a desperate sacrifice. The Benetton story begins with tragedy in post-war Italy. Leone Benetton, the family patriarch, died in July 1945 when his eldest son Luciano was just 10 years old. The war had exhausted Leone's strength. He spent most of his final months in hospital while his wife Rosa battled a heart condition. Their deaths left Rosa alone with 4 children, Luciano at 10, Giuliana at 8, Gilberto at 4, and the infant Carlo. The circumstances were dire. Luciano dropped out of school at age 14 to work in a clothing shop, also selling newspapers on the streets to support his younger siblings. Despite the hardship, he cared for his brothers and sister with affection, maintaining a cheerful spirit that made him a role model in those difficult years. By the early 1960s, Giuliana had developed considerable skill as a knitter. One day, she made a bright yellow sweater for Luciano to wear to his job at the clothing shop. The vivid color drew admiration everywhere he went. People stopped him on the street. Colleagues asked where he had bought it. Customers wanted to know if the store carried anything similar. Luciano, who had spent years in retail observing what customers wanted, immediately recognized the commercial potential. In 1955, when Luciano was 20 and Giuliana was 18, they sold Luciano's accordion and their younger brother Carlo's bicycle to raise 300,000 lire, approximately $200 at the time, equivalent to roughly $2,200 today. This was the price of their first knitting machine. Even with the proceeds, they needed a loan to complete the purchase. Giuliana became the designer and producer. Luciano transformed into the salesman, loading his bicycle with sweaters and delivering them to local stores. Their first collection, sold at a shop called Très Jolie, consisted of 20 pieces in vibrant colors, ranging from yellow to blue and green. They sold approximately 20 sweaters per week. Modest numbers, but steady. Within 4 months, they had paid off their loan. The business grew as Carlo and Gilberto joined the operation. By offering an alternative to the grey, black and beige tones that dominated the post-war Italian market, the Benetton siblings carved out a niche. Bright colours, soft textures, affordable prices, a fresh, sporty style that felt modern against the drab backdrop of recovering Europe. In 1965, they officially incorporated their business as Maglificio di Ponzano Veneto dei Fratelli Benetton, the Benetton knitwear factory. Within 4 years, they would open their first store outside Italy. The first Benetton retail store opened in 1966 in Belluno, a town on the slopes of the Dolomites. The layout was unusual for its time. Customers could browse and choose garments independently without pressure from sales staff. They called it My Market. Partner Piero Marchiorello, son of a city merchant, predicted, "If it works here, it will work everywhere." A second store opened in Cortina d'Ampezzo, a ski resort popular with wealthy Italians. The architects Tobia and Afra Scarpa designed an open space without traditional furniture, where light brought out the colors of the sweaters and the counter was replaced by a small table at the entrance. During the winter of 1967, the Cortina store sold hundreds of sweaters every day. Paris came in 1969 on Boulevard Saint-Germain, New York's Madison Avenue in 1980, Tokyo in 1982, Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union in 1989. By the early 1970s, 500 Benetton stores operated worldwide. Some were directly owned by the family, while others were managed by a network of entrepreneurial traders who took a chance and became brand ambassadors. What truly set Benetton apart was a manufacturing breakthrough. Luciano returned from a trip to Scotland, where he had studied ancient wool processing methods, with an idea. The traditional practice was to dye yarn before knitting it into garments. Luciano wondered if the process could be reversed. Working with Ado Montana from a dyeing family, Luciano spent months in a basement experimenting with wool and dyes. After countless failures, one night a sweater without defects emerged from the dyeing tank. This tinto in capo approach, dye upon garment, gave Benetton an enormous advantage. The company could produce large volumes of undyed garments to exploit economies of scale, then quickly dye them based on actual sales data rather than guessing months in advance which colors customers would want. The innovation slashed inventory risk and production-led times. Benetton also pioneered a franchising model where franchisees initially paid no royalties, enabling rapid global expansion with minimal capital investment. By the end of 2001, approximately 5,500 smaller third-party owned stores operated globally, complemented by about 100 company-owned megastores in major cities. In 1982, Benetton hired photographer Oliviero Toscani as creative director. His first major campaign in 1984, All the Colors of the World, featured models of different ethnicities posing together in Benetton sweaters on a white background, between hugs and smiles. Simple, colorful, commercial. But Toscani had grander ambitions. He began shifting Benetton's $80 million advertising budget away from traditional product shots toward imagery designed to generate headlines. He justified the approach in a 1991 New York Times interview. "I have found out that advertising is the richest and most powerful medium existing today, so I feel responsible to do more than to say, 'Our sweater is pretty.'" The sweaters were about to disappear from the ads entirely. The fall-winter 1991 campaign featured a photograph of a priest and nun locked in a kiss. The priest, dressed in black, had his back to the viewer. The nun, dressed in pure white, looked up at him as they kissed. The Catholic Church condemned it as trivializing, mocking, profaning, and offending religious values. The Spring-Summer 1992 campaign showed David Kirby, a 32-year-old AIDS patient, dying in a hospital bed surrounded by his anguished family. The photograph had originally appeared in Life magazine. Germany and France banned the advertisements. The Catholic Church felt the image was an inappropriate allusion to Pietà imagery of the Virgin Mary cradling Jesus after the crucifixion. Yet David's father defended the decision. Benetton didn't use us or exploit us. We used them. Because of them, your photo was seen all over the world, and that's exactly what David wanted. The same campaign included a photograph of a mafia killing in Palermo, marked by a pool of blood. The daughter of the murdered man announced she would sue, asking, "How does my father's death enter into publicity for sweaters?" Toscani's provocations gave rise to the term shock-vertising. The final controversy came in January 2000 with a campaign titled "We on Death Row." Toscani's team visited several US prisons and photographed 26 death row inmates in prison uniforms, along with each inmate's name, date of birth, crime, and expected method of execution. Missouri Attorney General Jay Nixon filed a lawsuit, claiming Benetton had misrepresented the project as educational rather than commercial. Clearly, our prisons are not allowed commercial endeavors, and prison officials would have never allowed entry had they been told the truth about the project, Nixon stated. Similar complaints emerged from Kentucky, North Carolina, and Nebraska. Sears immediately severed ties with Benetton, calling the images terribly insensitive. The retailer pulled the Benetton line from all 400 stores that carried it. Groups picketed Houston's Sears stores and Benetton's New York office. The California Assembly called for a boycott. As advertising controversies mounted, internal problems emerged. On March 6, 2003, Luciano announced the family would step back from running the company. "The responsibility of the managers has to be total," he stated. "We will just be shareholders. We have learned the lesson with Autogrill and Autostrade." Alessandro Benetton, Luciano's eldest son, was appointed chairman in April 2012 with impressive credentials. A degree from Boston University, an MBA from Harvard, experience at Goldman Sachs. The appointment coincided with a critical moment. After 36 years on the Milan Stock Exchange, Benetton was delisted and taken private. Since 2000, investors had watched market value plunge from $4.3 billion to just $720 million by the end of 2011. 2012 would be the last year the company reported a profit. Alessandro's tenure lasted 2 years. In 2016, he left the board entirely due to differences with the company's new strategies. Between 2000 and 2024, Benetton cycled through numerous CEOs, each bringing new plans, none reversing the decline. While Benetton churned through leadership, competitors were building something the Italian company could not match: speed. Benetton operated on 12-month collection cycles. Zara delivered new designs to stores in 3 weeks. H&M matched that pace. Shein introduced 1,500,000 new products in a single year, compared to Zara's 40,000 and H&M's 23,000. By 2023, Shein generated an estimated $32.2 billion in revenue. Benetton's knit now, dye later innovation, revolutionary in the 1970s, could not compete against supply chains built entirely around speed. While competitors might take weeks from design to delivery, Benetton still required months. E-commerce represented only 10% of Benetton's revenue by 2024, decades behind competitors who had built sophisticated digital operations. The company finally launched a revamped e-shop and created an e-business division reporting directly to the CEO only in 2024. On April 24, 2013, approximately 3,000 workers entered Rana Plaza, an 8-story commercial building in Bangladesh. The previous day, workers had discovered large cracks in the structure. The shops and bank on the lower floors immediately closed. The garment factory owners on the upper floors ignored the warnings. Factory managers forced workers inside using the threat of withholding wages. At 8:57 in the morning, the building collapsed in 2 minutes, leaving only the ground floor intact. 1,000 138 people died. Over 2,500 were injured. Amnesty International called it the most shocking recent example of business-related human rights abuse. Benetton initially denied any involvement. They later admitted to subcontracted production there, though they claimed the relationship had ended 21 days before the collapse and represented only 1.8% of the building's output. On August 14, 2018, the eve of Italy's biggest summer holiday, a 210-metre section of the Ponte Morandi in Genoa collapsed during a torrential rainstorm. 43 people died. Between 30 and 35 cars and 3 trucks fell from the bridge. Survivors described feeling their cars lift at the front before nosediving into a 45-metre abyss, battered by rubble and crushed under concrete. Among the victims, the Robiano family, Father Roberto, his wife Ercilia, and their 8-year-old child wiped out entirely. The bridge was operated by Autostrade per l'Italia, controlled by Atlantia SPA, in which the Benetton family's Edizione held a 30.25% stake. Gianni Mion, a former highways company boss in charge of the bridge and its maintenance, testified in 2023. It emerged that the bridge had an original design defect and that there was a collapse risk, he told the trial. The risk had been raised at a meeting 8 years before the tragedy. "I didn't do anything, and it's my greatest regret." Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte called the accident unacceptable in modern society. The family's wealth dropped $2 billion after the collapse. By 2020, facing intense political pressure, the Benettons were forced to sell their Autostrade stake for €3.9 billion to a consortium led by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, less than they had paid at privatization in 1999, not accounting for inflation. Additionally, 566 people were evacuated from their homes beneath the bridge. Carlo Benetton died at age 74 in July 2018. 10 weeks later, Gilberto died at age 77. 2 of the 4 founding siblings were gone within months, and the man who had built Benetton's provocative image was about to destroy what little goodwill remained. In early February 2020, members of Italy's grassroots sardines movement met with members of the Benetton family. The meeting drew widespread condemnation due to the family's connection to the bridge disaster. In a February 4th interview with state-owned RAI television, Oliviero Toscani was asked to comment. His response ended his career with the company. "Who cares if a bridge falls down?" 43 people had died. Hundreds had been left homeless. The family was facing criminal investigations, lawsuits, and forced divestment of billion-dollar assets. 2 days later, Benetton severed all ties with Toscani. The company and chairman Luciano Benetton issued a statement saying they completely disassociate from Toscani's remarks. Toscani took to Twitter to express regret for his extrapolated and confused words. The damage was irreversible. The photographer, who had spent 18 years using shocking imagery to grab headlines, had finally said something the company could not defend. On May 25, 2024, Luciano Benetton, then 89 years old, dropped a bombshell in an interview with Milan Daily Corriere della Sera. He announced he was stepping down as chairman. He publicly attacked CEO Massimo Renon, whom he had appointed in 2020. "In short, I trusted them, and I made a mistake," Luciano stated. "I was betrayed in the truest sense of the word." He accused Renon of leaving a hole of €100 million in the accounts. "A few months ago, I understood that something was wrong, and that the image of the group that the management presented to us during board meetings was not real." The 2023 financial year had closed with a net loss of €230 million, nearly triple the previous year's €81 million. Since 2013, accumulated losses exceeded €1,600 million. 180 stores closed in 2024 alone. Between 418 and 500 more were scheduled to close by the end of 2025. Peak store count had been 7,000. By 2025, approximately 2,500 to 3,000 would remain. The workforce was cut from 1,100 employees to 700. Production sites in Tunisia, Croatia, and Serbia were shut down. New CEO Claudio Sforza called the restructuring the company's last chance at survival. He called on workers to all row in the same direction. The family holding company provided emergency capital, 260 million euros for the reorganization, on top of 350 million invested over the prior 3 years. The irony cuts deep. While the fashion business collapsed, the family's infrastructure holdings thrived. Edizione achieved revenues of 10,100 million euros in 2024, with a net asset value of 13,200 million euros and EBIT of 1,300 million euros. The family remains wealthy. Of the 4 founders, only Luciano and Giuliana survive, both approaching 90. Alessandro Benetton was reconfirmed as chairman of Edizione in June 2025 for another 3-year term. In Genoa, they built a new bridge. The Genoa-St. George Bridge was inaugurated on August 3, 2020, designed by architect Renzo Piano. The structure spans 1,067 meters and incorporates 240 fiber optic sensors for continuous structural monitoring, plus robots that run along rails to inspect the superstructure externally. The Benetton name appears nowhere near it. 4 siblings sold an accordion and a bicycle in 1955. They built an empire that dressed the world in color. Their descendants manage a 13 billion euro holding company. The rainbow sweaters are still for sale in the remaining stores, but the name Benetton means something different now. In 1932, 3 men pooled $300 to start a nail polish company in a cramped room on Manhattan's West Side. 90 years later, their creation filed for bankruptcy with $3.7 billion in debt and $13 million in cash, less than a single day's revenue. Between those 2 moments lies the story of how debt killed a dynasty. Ronald Perelman bought Revlon in 1985 for $2.7 billion using borrowed money. For 37 years, he treated the company as a personal ATM, extracting billions in dividends while the business rotted from within. When bankruptcy finally came in 2022, his 85% stake was cancelled entirely. He walked away with nothing. The man who had built his fortune through leveraged buyouts was destroyed by the same strategy that made him rich. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we examine the cosmetics empire that proved you can borrow against the future for only so long before the bill comes due. Revlon once commanded 20% of every dollar spent on cosmetics at American department store counters, a figure so dominant that when Charles Revson walked into Bergdorf Goodman or Saks Fifth Avenue, managers cleared their schedules and buyers cancelled lunch. The company that 3 men founded with $300 in 1932, approximately $7,000 in today's currency, had grown into a billion-dollar empire by the time Revson died in 1975, trailing only Avon in the American beauty market and exporting what Madison Avenue called the American look to women on 6 continents. The assets accumulated along the way reflected a founder who understood that selling lipstick was really selling fantasy. Revson's triplex apartment at 625 Park Avenue featured a private elevator and art collection heavy on Renoir. His yacht, the Ultima II, was replaced by the even larger doomed Emotion II when the first vessel proved insufficiently impressive. His corporate headquarters on Fifth Avenue operated with such legendary employee turnover that industry insiders called it the revolving door. Burnout as corporate culture, perfectionism as religion. The flagship product that defined the brand's golden age was Fire and Ice, launched in 1952 with model Dorian Lee in a silver sequined dress and a cheeky questionnaire asking women if they were made for fire and ice. The campaign sold the fantasy of the daring modern woman and moved lipstick by the ton. When Revson sponsored the $64,000 question television quiz show in 1955, crime rates reportedly dropped on broadcast nights because so many Americans were glued to their screens, and Living Lipstick sold out nationwide within days. The man who orchestrated this empire was a tyrannical perfectionist who viewed cosmetics not as chemistry, but as what he called psychosexual fashion. He bullied subordinates, pitted executives against one another, monitored the minutiae of every shade and advertising copy, and possessed instincts so infallible that in 1939 he invented the concept of matching lips and fingertips, instantly doubling sales by compelling women to buy 2 products instead of 1. Charles Revson died in 1975, leaving behind annual revenues approaching $1 billion, approximately $5.7 billion in today's currency, and a company vulnerable to anyone willing to bet borrowed money on borrowed time. The scandals that followed, the leveraged buyout that loaded the company with debt, the 37 years of extraction that hollowed out the business, the bankruptcy that wiped out the controlling family entirely, receive extended treatment in the free Substack newsletter, where the financial autopsies, too complex for documentary format, reveal what happens when raiders mistake companies for ATMs. Ronald Perlman acquired Revlon in 1985, believing he had purchased a cash machine. He had actually purchased a time bomb with a 37-year fuse. The Revlon story began in the darkest depths of the Great Depression with a single revolutionary idea. On March 1, 1932, brothers Charles and Joseph Revson partnered with chemist Charles Lachman, who contributed the L to the Revlon name, to launch the Revlon Nail Enamel Corporation from a cramped room on Manhattan's West Side. While existing polishes were made from transparent dyes, the Revsons used pigments to create opaque, high-coverage enamels in a spectrum of vibrant colors that no competitor could match. The product was an instant sensation among manicurists, and Charles Revson was the engine driving its expansion. He viewed cosmetics not as products, but as psychology, the alchemy of transforming a 50-cent tube into a vessel of aspiration. The 1950s marked Revlon's ascent to cultural dominance. The Fire and Ice campaign of 1952 became perhaps the most famous beauty advertisement in history, and the $64,000 question sponsorship in 1955 sent sales stratospheric. By the late 1950s, Revlon had opened operations in Europe, Latin America, and Asia. In 1973, Revson launched Charlie, a liberated pantsuit-wearing fragrance that became the world's best-selling perfume and the final triumph of his era. Sensing his declining health, Revson handpicked his successor in 1974. Michel Christian Bergerac, a suave, French-born executive running ITT's European operations. The recruitment made headlines for the cost: a $1.5 million signing bonus and a 5-year contract worth $5 million, approximately $9.5 million and $31 million respectively in today's currency. Bergerac was the antithesis of Revson in every way that would matter. Where Revson was a product-obsessed merchant prince who could detect a half-shade variance in lipstick pigment, Bergerac was a dispassionate financial manager who believed a company was a portfolio of assets to be optimized. Charles Revson died in 1975, leaving behind nearly $1 billion in annual sales, and a successor who would spend the next decade making the company look attractive to exactly the wrong kind of buyer. Under Bergerac's tenure, the soul of the company shifted from beauty to balance sheets. He aggressively diversified Revlon away from the volatility of fashion and into the regulated world of healthcare, acquiring Coburn Optical, Barnes Hind Contact Lens Solutions, Lewis Howe makers of Tums Antacid, and Armour Pharmaceutical. On paper, the strategy worked. By 1979, sales climbed to $1.7 billion and profits passed $190 million. But management's attention drifted away from the beauty counters. Department stores grew tired of Revlon's arrogance and service failures, favoring prestige competitors like Estée Lauder and Lancôme. In the mass market, CoverGirl began eating away at Revlon's drugstore dominance with fresher, younger marketing. Revlon's market share in department stores plummeted from 20% to 10%. By the mid-1980s, the stock price languished, and the conglomerate looked like a dinosaur ripe for dismemberment. In June 1985, the sharks began to circle. Ronald Owen Perelman, a cigar-chomping 42-year-old financier who had built a fortune turning around modest companies, saw in Revlon the perfect target. Through his investment vehicle, Pantry Pride, a small, bankrupt supermarket chain he controlled, Perelman approached Bergerac with a friendly offer to buy Revlon for $47.50 per share. Bergerac, viewing Perelman as a gauche corporate raider unworthy of Revlon's legacy, dismissed the offer as ridiculous and refused to meet. The miscalculation triggered one of the bloodiest takeover battles in Wall Street history. Perelman was backed by Drexel Burnham Lambert and its junk bond king, Michael Milken. Milken issued a highly confident letter asserting he could raise billions in high-yield debt to finance the deal, meaning a small fish like Pantry Pride could swallow a whale like Revlon by borrowing against the whale's own assets. As Perelman raised his bid to $50, then $53, and finally $56.25, Revlon's board fought back with a poison pill and cut a deal with private equity firm Forstmann Little to buy the company for $57.25 per share. Perelman sued. The Delaware Supreme Court ruled against Revlon's board in the landmark case that established the Revlon duties doctrine. Once a company's sale is inevitable, the board must get the best price for stockholders, not favor a white knight over a raider. On November 5, 1985, Perelman won. He paid $58 per share, valuing the deal at $2.7 billion, approximately $7.6 billion in today's currency. To pay down the massive debt, he immediately stripped Revlon of its healthcare divisions, selling everything except the cosmetics core. The interest payments on what remained would strangle the company for the next 3 decades. For 30 years, Revlon languished under Perelman's ownership, while the billionaire extracted value and the underlying business steadily rotted. The statistics of contraction are damning. In 1990, just 5 years after the takeover, Procter & Gamble controlled 33% of the US mass market cosmetics sector, while Revlon had slipped to 20%. By 2003, Revlon reported 16 consecutive quarters of losses. Market share fell to 11% by 2007. By 2017, it had collapsed to 6%. The original sin was the debt service from the 1985 leveraged buyout. For 30 years, Revlon operated with a capital structure that prioritized interest payments to bondholders over product innovation. While L'Oréal and Estée Lauder reinvested 3 to 4% of sales into research and development and 20 to 30% into marketing, Revlon used its cash to service debt. Aging packaging made Revlon products look identical in 2010 to how they looked in 1990. Competitors refreshed their lines every few years. In 2013, lacking funds to fight a localized marketing war, Revlon completely exited the Chinese market, the world's second-largest economy, laying off 1,100 people and abandoning a critical future growth engine. Perelman's ownership was marked by chaotic leadership turnover, a revolving door of CEOs, each launching turnaround plans abandoned by their successors. When Deborah Perelman, Ron's daughter, finally took the CEO role in 2018, she discovered a shocking statistic. E-commerce represented just 2% of Revlon's total sales. The company was still behaving as if department store counters were the only way to sell makeup. Meanwhile, the industry had shifted to digitally native brands. Kylie Cosmetics and Fenty Beauty sold community and inclusivity. Fenty launched with 40 foundation shades, instantly exposing Revlon's limited range as exclusionary. The clean beauty movement made Revlon's chemical-heavy formulations look toxic to younger buyers. In 2016, desperate to reverse the decline, CEO Fabian Garcia proposed a transformational deal, acquiring Elizabeth Arden for $870 million. On paper, the logic looked sound. Revlon was strong in mass-market drugstores. Elizabeth Arden was strong in prestige channels and international markets. In practice, it was two drowning swimmers grabbing onto each other. Elizabeth Arden's sales had plummeted 28% between 2013 and 2015, and its celebrity fragrance business was collapsing as consumers tired of Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift perfumes. Most critically, the deal was financed almost entirely with debt. To fund the $870 million purchase and refinance existing loans, Revlon took on a $1.8 billion senior secured term loan and issued $450 million in new unsecured notes at a steep 6.25% interest rate. Total debt exceeded $3 billion, a staggering amount for a company with less than $2.5 billion in revenue and shrinking margins. Interest payments alone ballooned to over $200 million annually. By 2019, interest expense was frequently higher than operating income. Revlon had become a zombie company, working solely to pay its lenders with nothing left to fight for the American consumer. The COVID-19 pandemic devastated the color cosmetics industry. As office work ended and mask mandates began, lipstick sales evaporated. Revlon's revenue plunged 21% to $1.9 billion in 2020. Sales rebounded 9.2% in 2021, but this recovery revealed a more lethal problem: the global supply chain collapse. Revlon's product portfolio was a logistical nightmare. A single tube of lipstick required 35 to 40 different raw materials sourced from different corners of the globe. If just one ingredient was missing, the entire product could not be made. Competitors with cash, L'Oréal, Estée Lauder, could pay premiums to secure ingredients and air freight inventory. Revlon, paralyzed by debt, could not. Vendors sensed the end was near and demanded cash on delivery or refused to ship entirely. Without cash, Revlon couldn't buy ingredients. Without ingredients, it could not make product. Without product, it faced fill-rate fines from retailers like Walmart and CVS. By mid-2022, major retail partners warned they would delist Revlon products if inventory did not improve. As Revlon circled the drain, the personal fortune of Ronald Perelman collapsed in real time. His net worth plummeted from $19.8 billion in 2018 to $4.2 billion in 2020 and finally to $1.9 billion by 2022. The billionaire initiated a fire sale of trophy assets that stunned the luxury world, not to raise cash, but to satisfy margin calls. Perelman had pledged his Revlon shares and other assets as collateral for personal loans from Deutsche Bank. When Revlon's stock crashed, the banks demanded their money. In July 2020, he sold his 70% stake in AM General, maker of the Humvee, for an estimated $1 billion. He dumped his stake in Scientific Games for another $1 billion. He sold his flavor companies Merisant and MAFCO for $510 million. The most painful sales were his art. Court documents revealed that between 2020 and 2022, Perelman quietly sold 71 museum-quality artworks for $963 million, masterpieces by Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Roy Lichtenstein, and Jasper Johns. Where did the money go? Almost all of it, $910 million, went directly to Deutsche Bank to pay off personal debts. He listed his 257-foot yacht C2, his Gulfstream 650 jet, and his 57-acre East Hampton estate, the Creeks, for $115 million. He even auctioned off household furniture. The man who had spent the 1980s buying up corporate America was ending his career selling everything he owned. By June 15, 2022, Revlon had just $13 million in cash on hand and a $50 million interest payment due. The entire GDP of a small country could have been wired by accident and still not saved them, which is exactly what happened 5 weeks earlier when Citibank mistakenly sent $893 million to Revlon's lenders instead of a $7.8 million interest payment, and 10 hedge funds refused to return $508 million of it. On June 16, 2022, the dynasty collapsed. Revlon filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York. The filing revealed a company drowning in red ink, $3.7 billion in debt against assets that were largely intangible, brand names and goodwill, and just $13 million in cash, less than a single day's revenue. In a surreal twist, the bankruptcy filing triggered a manic speculative bubble. Just days after declaring insolvency, Revlon became a meme stock darling on Reddit's Wall Street bets. Retail investors, hoping for a repeat of the Hertz bankruptcy miracle, piled into worthless shares. The stock price, which had crashed to $1.17, skyrocketed 600% in a week, hitting nearly $9 per share. It was a mirage. Unlike Hertz, which had tangible assets that appreciated in value, Revlon had only debt. The bankruptcy court ruled the equity worthless, leaving thousands of retail speculators with nothing. The restructuring plan was a total wipeout for the Perelman family. Ronald Perelman had bought Revlon for $2.7 billion in 1985. Over 37 years, he had treated it as a personal ATM, extracting billions in dividends to fund his lifestyle, his art collection, his yachts, his jets, his estates. When the bill came due, his 85% equity stake was cancelled entirely. He walked away with zero ownership in the company he had controlled for 4 decades. Control passed to the very people Perelman had fought for years, his creditors. A consortium of distressed debt specialists, Glendon Capital Management, King Street Capital, Angelo Gordon, and Oak Hill Advisors, converted over $2.7 billion of debt into equity. On May 2, 2023, Revlon emerged from Chapter 11 as a private company, shedding $2 billion in debt, but still carrying $1.5 billion. The new owners immediately purged the old guard. Deborah Perelman stepped down in August 2023, severing the final link to her father's empire. In the first quarter of 2024, sales dropped another 3.8% to $488.5 million. At Ulta Beauty and Sephora, Revlon has lost shelf space to clean girl aesthetic brands. The legacy products, once revolutionary, now feel like relics. Charles Revson built a dynasty on the belief that he was selling hope in a jar. Ronald Perelman destroyed it by treating it as cash in a spreadsheet. From its humble $300 founding in 1932 to its bankruptcy in 2022, Revlon's arc tracks American capitalism itself, from the product-obsessed entrepreneurship of the Depression to the financialized extraction of the leveraged buyout era. You can borrow against the future for only so long before the bill comes due. And when it does, not even the most famous red lipstick in the world can hide the red ink. Walk into the Metropolitan Museum of Art and find the Leonard A. Lauder Research Center for Modern Art. 78 Cubist masterpieces line the walls, 33 Picassos, 17 Braques, works that one man spent 37 years collecting with the patience of a scholar and the wallet of a billionaire. Drive down Fifth Avenue and stop at the Neue Gallery, where Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer I hangs in galleries designed to replicate the exact shade of yellow on the collector's own walls. Fly to Palm Beach and find an empty oceanfront lot, 2¼ acres, where a $110 million mansion once stood before the heir who bought it decided to demolish the whole thing. The Lauder family built a $38 billion fortune selling face cream. They converted that fortune into art collections rivaling museums, Manhattan penthouses on Park Avenue, and compounds stretching across the Hamptons. Then the cousins turned on each other. In September 2024, Jane Lauder sent a letter to the board accusing her cousin William of destroying the company. The letter leaked. William stepped down. Jane resigned. An outsider took control for the first time in the company's 90-year history. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we examine how a woman mixing face creams on a kitchen stove in Queens built one of the world's great beauty empires, and how her grandchildren tore it apart, fighting over the wreckage. The Lauder family fortune at its peak divided across two brothers and their children like a map of competing fiefdoms. Leonard, the eldest son and builder of the modern company, assembled one of the most valuable private art collections in existence, 78 Cubist masterpieces gathered over nearly 4 decades. The psychology driving such empire building and the family devastation it produces receives extended treatment in our free Substack newsletter, where Dynasties too complex for documentary format reveal what inherited ambition actually costs across generations. The Lauder story belongs in that company. At the legendary Victor and Sally Gann sale at Christie's in 1997, Leonard acquired Picasso's Femme assise dans un fauteuil, a deeply eroticized portrait of Picasso's mistress, for nearly $25 million against a $15 to $20 million estimate. His curator Emily Braun observed that the painting's exhibition history ran pages. David Nash, former head of Impressionist and modern art at Sotheby's, noted that Leonard was the go-to person for Cubist paintings if you had a good one to sell. In 2013, he donated the entire collection to the Metropolitan Museum, a gift representing over 13% of his total wealth, a sacrifice that spoke to a man who understood that immortality comes through institutional transformation. Ronald, the younger brother, built a radically different collection spanning 500 works from medieval sculpture through German Expressionism. His centerpiece was the Klimt portrait purchased in 2006 for $135 million. At the time, the highest price ever paid for a painting. He co-founded the Neue Galerie on Fifth Avenue to house his obsession, designing gallery spaces where walking through the museum meant walking through Ronald Lauder's sensibility expressed in architecture. The third generation inherited art, real estate, and expectations. William owned a full-floor apartment at 778 Park Avenue, a 1931 Rosario Candela building considered the architect's greatest achievement. He purchased a second unit in the same building from Ronald Perlman for $24 million. In Palm Beach, he paid $110 million for an oceanfront mansion, then demolished the entire structure 2 years later, preserving only the land. Erin, Ronald's daughter, inherited Estée's original East Hampton property, a Greek revival mansion near Georgica Pond, where she still uses her grandmother's plates and silverware. "Using her plates and silverware, I feel her presence," Erin has said. The property hosts 60 or 70 family members for holiday gatherings, connecting generations through tablescapes and rituals that money built and tradition maintains. The real estate, the art, the Hamptons compounds, these were visible manifestations of dominance, the architecture through which a family demonstrates its permanence to the world and to itself. But that permanence was built on a foundation of creams cooked on a kitchen stove, and the woman who stirred those pots had started with nothing but shame and ambition. Josephine Esther Mentzer grew up in Corona, Queens, the daughter of Hungarian Jewish immigrants who ran a hardware store. She was ashamed of her origins, the accents, the immigrant neighborhood, the outsider status in a country that did not yet celebrate such things. Her uncle, Dr. John Schatz, changed everything. He was a chemist who mixed face creams and skin treatments in a small laboratory, and young Esther watched him work, absorbing formulas and techniques, developing what she later called an obsession with making women beautiful. In 1930, she married Joseph Lauder, a name his Austrian father had misspelled upon immigration. They later corrected it to Lauder. The couple's first factory was a former restaurant kitchen at 1 West 64th Street in Manhattan, where they cooked creams on gas burners by hand, filling jars and affixing labels themselves. Their first office cost $25 monthly. a sum that felt astronomical for a struggling startup working out of a kitchen. Estée selected pale turquoise jars because the color evoked luxury and matched the bathroom decor of affluent 1940s homes. She understood that packaging psychology mattered as much as formula efficacy. She was not selling cream, she was selling aspiration housed in a color-coordinated vessel. In 1933, their first son, Leonard, was born. By age 14, he was delivering product to Saks Fifth Avenue on his bicycle, watching his mother's relentless demonstrations. Her refusal to accept no. Her belief that quality and persistence could overcome any obstacle. Estée insisted her salespeople receive meticulous training. They were not to push products, but to give makeovers. To see each customer not as a transaction, but as someone deserving of beauty and attention. In her salons and at counters, she called her creams jars of hope. She believed every woman, regardless of age or circumstance, deserved to feel beautiful. This philosophy would guide her marketing innovations, turning limitations into advantages and transforming the entire beauty industry in the process. Estée Lauder could not afford traditional advertising, so she made a radical decision: invest $50,000 in samples instead. This was seed capital poured directly into letting women experience the product, trusting that trial would generate purchase. When she could not get meetings with department store buyers, she attended charity luncheons and distributed custom lipsticks to every socialite in the room, generating organic demand through Manhattan's upper echelons. When women sat under hair dryers at beauty salons, Estée appeared beside them, applying her creams and oils while they had nowhere to go, letting texture and scent do the persuasion. She mailed postcards offering free lipstick to women in affluent neighborhoods with a simple instruction: visit me at Saks Fifth Avenue. By 1947, her demonstrations had generated sufficient buzz that Saks Cosmetics buyer Robert Fisk finally placed an order: $800 worth of product. It sold out in 2 days. Saks had never experienced such rapid depletion in the beauty category. Estée flooded customers with congratulatory postcards, offering a complimentary cream-based powder with every purchase. This gift with purchase concept became industry standard. 80 years later, it remains the primary marketing vehicle in prestige beauty. Leonard later explained the philosophy. A free sample was the foundation on which Estée Lauder was built, because if you give a customer a sample and they like it and come back again and again, that is what builds the business. The 1950s brought explosive growth through Youth Dew, launched in 1953 as a bath oil that could also be worn as perfume. Perfume was expensive and reserved for special occasions. Bath oil was affordable and functional. By making one product serve dual purposes, Estée democratized luxury. Youth Dew became a sensation, transforming the company into a multi-million-dollar business virtually overnight. But by 1958, when Leonard formally joined the company after his Navy service, around 80% of annual revenues came from that single product. Leonard identified this concentration as a fundamental flaw. His mother had built one monumental brand instead of multiple complementary brands. He set out to fix this through acquisition, and his solution would transform a single product company into an empire of 26 distinct labels spanning cosmetics, skincare, fragrance, and hair care. Leonard was methodical where his mother was intuitive. He called Estée Mrs. Lauder at work, maintaining professional distance in a family company where personal and professional lines blurred dangerously. Under his leadership from 1982 to 1999, the company expanded from a handful of brands into a diversified portfolio. He acquired MAC Cosmetics and Bobbi Brown in 1998, figuring the two would push each other through competition. He added Aveda and Jo Malone London in 1999. La Mer positioned the company at the absolute luxury apex. The company went public in 1996, but the family maintained voting control through a dual-class stock structure, ensuring family consensus remained mandatory on all major decisions. Senior employees still received handwritten blue notes from Leonard on Lauder blue notepad, frequently signed with smiley faces. When employees left the company, management would wave them goodbye saying, "See you soon," and many returned. Ronald, born in 1944, charted a different path through diplomacy and politics. President Reagan appointed him U.S. ambassador to Austria in 1986, during a sensitive period following Kurt Waldheim's election, despite accusations of Nazi war crimes involvement. Upon returning, Ronald ran as the Republican nominee for mayor of New York City in 1989, the costliest campaign in city history at the time, on a conservative platform advocating death penalty reinstatement and elimination of rent control. He lost to Democrat David Dinkins. He established the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation, funding Jewish schools throughout Eastern Europe, and later served as chairman of the Conference of Presidents. The third generation inherited billions and expectations of dynastic stewardship, but also fragmentation. Leonard insisted his son William work for someone else first and learn a foreign language before joining the company. William spent 3 years at Macy's learning retail operations, then joined Estée Lauder in 1986. When Fabrizio Freda was recruited from Procter & Gamble in 2008, William transitioned to executive chairman, a senior oversight role but not operational control. For 16 years, William held that position while Freda ran day-to-day operations. And during that time, a scandal emerged that would undermine William's authority entirely. In Aspen, in 2000, while married, William began an affair with Taylor Stein. When she became pregnant, William allegedly demanded she abort. She refused and gave birth to their daughter in 2007. William allegedly paid Stein $1 million annually in child support and confidentiality payments. The arrangement collapsed when the 13-year-old daughter revealed her paternity on social media. William moved to evict Stein and their daughter from a $7 million Bel Air mansion, and Stein sued for breach of contract. The litigation became public, and the contrast between Estée's Jars of Hope philosophy and William's custody battle damaged family authority at the worst possible moment, just as the business itself began to collapse. For a decade, CEO Fabrizio Freda bet the company's future on China and travel retail. Asia Pacific came to represent over 30% of sales, with duty-free shops in airports and destination cities like Hainan functioning as the growth engine. The company invested over $1 billion in a Japanese manufacturing facility designed specifically to serve Chinese consumers more effectively. The facility was completed, the consumers never came. When China reopened in late 2022, the anticipated revenge spending failed to materialize. Young Chinese consumers faced high unemployment, became cost-conscious, and began buying local beauty brands at lower prices. Revenue fell 12% from peak. Net earnings collapsed 60%. Tom Ford Beauty, purchased for nearly $3 billion in 2022, recorded impairments exceeding $1.3 billion within 2 years, nearly half the acquisition value destroyed. In September 2024, when Freda announced his retirement, the board initiated a succession search considering both internal and external candidates. Jane Lauder, Ronald's daughter, believed the CEO position was hers by right. She had the family name, company knowledge, and demonstrated competence as chief data officer. The board selected Stéphane de la Faverie, an external hire. Jane's response was extraordinary. She submitted a confidential letter to board members accusing her cousin William of destroying the company and demanding his removal as executive chairman. The letter leaked to the Wall Street Journal. "It looks like Jane has some balls," said a person with ties to the family to Puck News. William announced he was stepping down days after the letter became public. Jane resigned her executive position within weeks. For the first time in company history, an external manager held the CEO title without a family member serving as co-equal executive chairman. The family manifesto, "We are not a family business, we are a family in business," had crumbled under competing ambitions, and the outsider who inherited the wreckage faced the question of whether anything could be salvaged. Stéphane de la Faverie assumed office on January 1, 2025, inheriting a company that had lost over $100 billion in market value from its peak. He launched the most significant restructuring in company history, cutting thousands of roles and targeting up to $1 billion in cost reductions. The company shifted from a centralized model to regional profit accountability, collapsing 7 global regions into 4. E-commerce reached a record 31% of revenue as the company pulled back from dying department store counters. Leonard Lauder died in June 2025 at age 92. Within months, trusts affiliated with his descendants sold over $1 billion worth of stock to settle estate obligations. The family retained approximately 82% of voting power, still dominant, but a slight erosion of the near-absolute control Leonard had engineered over decades. William remains on the board but stripped of executive authority. Jane remains on the board but stripped of operational responsibility. The fourth generation, the grandchildren spread across Palm Beach, Manhattan and the Hamptons, appear more interested in lifestyle ventures and design projects than in navigating the politics of a troubled public company. They grew up in a world where the dividend was birthright, not distant dream. Ronald's Neue Gallery remains a permanent embassy of his obsession with German and Austrian modernism. Leonard's Cubist collection at the Metropolitan Museum cements his name in the canon of collectors as securely as any fortune. These institutions will outlast earnings cycles and CEO tenures. In the 1990s, when asked what separated her firm from impersonal conglomerates swallowing the beauty industry, Estée said she feared the day when companies became just companies now, not a family's heart and soul. That day has arrived. The boardroom fights, CEO dramas, and billion-dollar impairments feel far removed from a girl in Corona learning chemistry from her uncle over a gas stove. Estée turned shame over her immigrant origins into ambition, and ambition into empire. Her descendants began their lives already inside the palace. Belonging, it turns out, is harder to sustain than hunger. The jars of hope are managed now by hired executives with incentive plans. The dynasty remains wealthy, visible, and powerful. What is gone is the kitchen table intimacy that created it. That iconic red Cartier box sits on your vanity, its golden embossed lettering catching the light as you lift the lid to reveal a gleaming piece of jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. The satisfaction of wearing something so expensive that strangers stop mid-conversation to stare, this is the Cartier experience that has seduced royalty for over a century. Yet behind that legendary red packaging lies one of history's most dramatic family sagas, where three brothers conquered the world through sheer audacity and perfect timing, only to watch their descendants surrender everything without a fight. The metal worker's son who founded this empire built something that was supposed to last forever, creating jewelry so magnificent that owning it meant joining an exclusive club where regular millionaires couldn't even apply for membership. Therefore, in today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we explore how the Cartier family created the ultimate luxury empire, and then lost it all to their own success. In the drawing rooms of European palaces and Manhattan penthouses, one name carried more weight than royal titles: Cartier. This was the family that built a $4 billion empire from scratch, their workshops creating the jewelry that crowned kings and adorned empresses. King Edward VII himself called them the Jeweller of Kings and the King of Jewelers, a title that opened every palace door from London to St. Petersburg. Their most spectacular creation was the Patiala necklace, commissioned in 1925 by the Maharaja of Patiala for 1 billion rupees, worth $2.5 billion today. Princess Matilda wore their sapphires, Empress Eugenie collected their platinum pieces, and Grace Kelly swept through Monaco dripping in their emeralds. Elizabeth Taylor's legendary appetite for luxury found its perfect match in Cartier's creations, while the Duke of Windsor trusted them with pieces fit for a king. Pierre Cartier pulled off the deal of the century when he traded a pearl necklace worth $1 million for a 6-story mansion on Fifth Avenue. Their London workshop worked around the clock to create 27 tiaras for King Edward's coronation in 1902, each piece a masterwork. Louis Cartier revolutionized jewelry by pioneering the use of platinum, while his tank watch became the timepiece that every powerful person had to own. Jacques Cartier disappeared into the jungles of India and emerged with rubies the size of eggs and emeralds that captured light like bottled fire. Their mystery-setting technique seemed to defy physics, making precious stones appear to float in midair without any visible supports. The three brothers had divided up the world like generals planning a campaign. Louis conquered Europe from Paris, Pierre dominated America, and Jacques ruled the British Empire from London. By 2020, the Cartier brand was worth $12.2 billion and generated $6.2 billion in annual revenue from over 200 stores worldwide. European duchesses, Indian maharajas, Russian aristocrats fleeing revolution, American tycoons, and Hollywood stars all worshipped at the Cartier altar. Their workshops housed craftsmen who practiced techniques passed down through generations, creating pieces that would survive wars, revolutions, and the collapse of entire civilizations. Owning Cartier wasn't just about having expensive jewelry. It was about joining an exclusive club where membership required more money than most countries possessed. The Cartier name had become synonymous with a level of luxury so extreme that regular millionaires couldn't even get through the front door. Their clients didn't just buy jewelry, they bought immortality, knowing that Cartier pieces would outlast their owners and their great-great-grandchildren. The family had achieved something remarkable. They had created a business that was bigger than any individual family member and more enduring than empires. Yet beneath all this success, something was already going wrong. The very wealth that had elevated them above ordinary people was about to destroy everything. The children and grandchildren who inherited this empire would prove that sometimes the greatest threat to a dynasty comes from within its own walls. Louis-François Cartier was born in 1819 Paris, where being poor meant staying poor and dreaming big was considered a waste of time. His father worked as a metal worker, coming home every night with hands stained black from crafting ordinary objects for people who paid in copper coins. His mother scrubbed the expensive clothes of rich women while her own family wore rags that had been patched so many times they looked like a crazy quilt. They lived in a tiny apartment that smelled like factory smoke and desperation, where every meal was a gamble and every winter threatened to be their last. But even as a kid, Louis-François had different eyes. He stared at beautiful things with the intensity of someone planning a heist. While other boys played with sticks and stones, he studied how light moved through glass and how metal could be shaped into something that made people gasp. His big break came when he apprenticed under Adolphe Picard, whose workshop on Rue Montorgueil was where rough stones became objects that wealthy women would kill to own. Picard's workshop was brutal. Apprentices bled over their work, and masters accepted nothing less than perfection that bordered on the impossible. The old man saw something special in Louis-François, a hunger that went beyond wanting nice things to actually understanding what made them powerful. Learning jewelry wasn't just about pretty baubles, it was about creating weapons of seduction that could conquer hearts and destroy enemies. When 1847 rolled around, Louis-François faced the moment that would either make him rich or leave him broke in a gutter somewhere. Picard offered to sell him the workshop, but it would cost every franc Louis-François had saved through years of living like a monk. This wasn't just buying a business, it was betting his entire future on his ability to turn stones and metal into gold. Smart enough to know that location determined everything in Paris, Louis-François moved to Place du Palais Royal in 1853, getting closer to where the money lived. By 1859, he had opened a boutique on Boulevard des Italiens during Napoleon III's reign, positioning himself where the emperor's crowd shopped. The game-changing moment came in 1856 when Princess Mathilde, the emperor's own cousin, brought him a broken necklace that other jewelers said couldn't be fixed. Louis-François treated that necklace like it was made of dynamite, knowing that success would open every important door in Paris while failure would end his dreams forever. When Princess Mathilde told her friends about the amazing work he had done, it spread through aristocratic circles like wildfire. Suddenly, the metalworker's son was getting commissions from empresses and duchesses who had never spoken to a commoner in their lives. In 1874, Louis-François handed the business over to his son Alfred, passing down something much bigger than a jewelry store. He had built a platform for greatness, a foundation that would soon support an empire spanning continents and commanding the loyalty of kings. Alfred Cartier raised 3 sons who turned out to be the perfect team for world domination, each brother bringing exactly what the family needed to conquer different continents. Louis was born in 1875 with an artist's brain and a businessman's ruthlessness, capable of designing jewelry that made grown women weep with desire. Pierre arrived in 1878 with the instincts of a born deal-maker who understood that in America, making noise mattered more than having noble blood. Jacques entered the world in 1884, destined to become an adventurer who would travel to dangerous places and come back with treasures that belonged in fairy tales. According to family stories told by their descendant Francesca Cartier-Brickell, the three boys once sat around a world map and literally divided up the planet like they were playing a board game. They made a pact that sounded crazy but turned out to be genius: create the greatest jewelry company in history, with Louis taking Europe, Pierre conquering America, and Jacques claiming the British Empire. Louis set up his headquarters on Rue de la Paix in 1899, turning the location into a pilgrimage site for every European aristocrat who wanted to own something extraordinary. He revolutionized the industry by figuring out how to work with platinum and created the tank watch, which became the timepiece that every important person had to have. Louis also invented mystery clocks that seemed to tell time by magic, with no visible mechanism holding the hands, a technical achievement that left competitors scratching their heads. Pierre launched his American invasion in 1909, immediately targeting the biggest names in the country: the Astors, Vanderbilts, and Rockefellers. His masterpiece was trading a pearl necklace for a Manhattan mansion, securing prime real estate on Fifth Avenue through sheer audacity and perfect timing. Pierre understood that Americans loved scandal and spectacle, which is why he bought the cursed Hope Diamond, knowing the newspaper coverage would be worth millions in free advertising. Jacques opened his London operation in 1902, timing it perfectly with King Edward's coronation, when everyone needed ceremonial jewellery for the biggest party in British history. He made dangerous trips to India, charming Maharajas into showing him their treasure rooms filled with rubies and emeralds that had been collected over centuries. These expeditions inspired his Tutti Frutti jewellery collection, pieces that captured the exotic beauty of Eastern design while appealing to European tastes. Jacques' connections with Indian royalty gave him access to gemstones so incredible that other jewelers could only dream about getting their hands on similar materials. The strategy paid off immediately when King Edward VII gave them an official royal warrant in 1904, basically announcing to the world that Cartier was the jewellery company of choice for royalty. Royal courts across Europe followed England's lead, with Spain, Portugal, Serbia, Russia and France all giving Cartier their official stamp of approval. The brothers proved they could adapt to anything by shifting their focus whenever political chaos moved wealth from one group to another. When the Russian Revolution wiped out their aristocratic Russian customers, they pivoted to American millionaires without missing a beat. When the Great Depression hit America, they focused on Indian Maharajas and later on oil-rich Middle Eastern clients who had money to burn. Their business model was brilliant in its simplicity. Follow the money wherever it goes and always be ready to serve whoever has the most of it. Death hit the Cartier dynasty like a 1-2 punch, taking out Jacques in 1941 at 58 and following up with Louis just months later in July 1942 at 67. These back-to-back losses gutted an empire that had been built around the irreplaceable combination of three very different but perfectly complementary brothers. The company had been designed like a three-legged stool, and now Pierre was left trying to balance the whole thing on one leg while watching everything they had built start to wobble. Pierre suddenly found himself running global operations alone during World War II, trying to maintain businesses across multiple continents while bombs were falling and governments were collapsing. The deaths marked more than just personal tragedy. They started a slow-motion collapse that would eventually destroy everything the family had spent decades building. The fourth generation inherited massive wealth without understanding the brutal work that had created it, treating their inheritance like a trust fund rather than a living business. These kids had grown up rich and comfortable, never knowing what it felt like to be hungry enough to work 18-hour days or desperate enough to risk everything on a single deal. As family historian Francesca Cartier-Brickell would later discover, by the time Pierre died in 1964, the family had become scattered and completely uninterested in running the business. The descendants had gotten really good at marrying rich people and making smart investments, but they had zero interest in the daily grind of actually managing a global jewelry empire. They preferred spending their winters bobsledding in St. Moritz to hawking tank watches, choosing lifestyle over legacy and comfort over the kind of obsessive dedication that had built their fortune. This shift revealed the classic problem with inherited wealth. The qualities that create empires Hunger, obsession, and willingness to sacrifice everything rarely get passed down to kids who never had to fight for anything. The business had been built around the assumption that family members would always prioritize the company above their personal comfort. But the fourth generation saw Cartier as a source of income. Geographic distance started breaking apart the unified vision that had made global expansion possible, as the different branches began operating like separate companies rather than parts of a single empire. New York followed American business practices, London operated according to British traditions, and Paris maintained European approaches, creating confusion where there had once been crystal-clear coordination. These differences had been manageable when the brothers were alive and talking to each other constantly, but now they created inefficiency and conflict as family members pursued their own interests. The luxury business itself was changing around them, requiring bigger capital investments and more sophisticated management than traditional family companies could easily handle. Professional competitors with access to serious money and modern management techniques started circling like sharks, sensing weakness in the increasingly fragmented Cartier operations. The family faced a choice that would determine whether they survived or became just another cautionary tale about dynasties that couldn't adapt to changing times. The 1960s and 70s brought massive changes to luxury retail, demanding the kind of capital and expertise that even successful family businesses struggled to provide. Many family members had become wealthy through strategic marriages and inherited investments, their prosperity completely disconnected from the actual work of making and selling jewelry. Some relatives showed more enthusiasm for their personal hobbies and social lives than for the demanding work of maintaining global operations across multiple time zones and cultures. The poison was already in the system, and the symptoms were about to become impossible to ignore. Pierre Cartier's death in 1964 was like pulling the keystone out of an arch. Suddenly, everything the family had built for over a century started crumbling. The remaining heirs faced a choice that would have horrified their ancestors: keep fighting to maintain family control or cash out and let someone else deal with the headaches. Claude Cartier fired the first shot in what became a complete family retreat, selling the New York operations in 1962 before Pierre had even died. Historical records show that Claude simply didn't have the drive or ambition that had made his relatives famous, treating his inheritance like unwanted baggage instead of a family treasure. His decision to sell wasn't just a business transaction. It was the first crack in a dam that would soon burst and wash away everything the family had built. Marion Cartier-Claudel and Jean-Jacques Cartier found themselves trying to run pieces of an empire that no longer worked together the way it had when the brothers were alive. The cousins couldn't agree on what Cartier should become, each having different ideas about the future that made it impossible to create any kind of unified strategy. Jean-Jacques Cartier, who ended up being the last family member to actually run part of the business, clearly hated the idea of selling but couldn't see any other realistic option. He understood what was being lost when his generation decided to give up, but the practical realities of running a global luxury business had become too complicated for a fractured family. The Paris headquarters fell in 1972 when Robert Hock and his investors bought it for $12,800,000, a fraction of what the business was actually worth. London was sold in 1974, and the final piece disappeared in 1976 when Cartier New York went to the same group that had already swallowed up the other branches. By 1979, all three branches had been reunited under something called Cartier Monde, but the founding family had been completely eliminated from the company that still carried their name. This marked the end of 117 years of family ownership, during which time a metalworker's son had built a global empire only to watch his great-grandchildren sell it off like old furniture. The irony was brutal. Under professional management, Cartier became more successful than it had ever been when the family was running it. The Swiss Richemont Group took over and proved that corporate efficiency could maintain luxury prestige while expanding globally beyond anything the original family had ever achieved. By 2020, Forbes ranked Cartier as the 56th most valuable brand in the world, worth $12.2 billion and generating $6.2 billion in annual revenue. The company now operates over 200 stores in 125 countries, creating wealth that makes the original family fortune look like pocket change. Elle Pagels, Pierre Cartier's granddaughter, maintains some connection to the business through her work with Richemont, representing the last remaining link between the bloodline and their former empire. Francesca Cartier-Brickell found a trunk full of family letters in her grandfather Jean-Jacques' wine cellar and used them to write the definitive book about how her family built and then lost everything. Her research preserves the story of three brothers who conquered the world only to have their descendants surrender it without even putting up a fight. The Cartier name still represents the absolute peak of luxury and craftsmanship, but now it serves as a monument to a family that had everything and threw it all away. Their story stands as the ultimate warning about what happens when people inherit empires they never had to build. Sometimes the greatest enemy of a dynasty isn't external competition, but internal indifference. Imagine you and your family have decided to visit our lovely capital to do some high-end luxury shopping. As you stroll down Oxford Street, you'll find yourself before an iconic building that forever changed the face of retail, Selfridges. Now its grand facade still whispers tales of a golden age when Hollywood stars and royalty rubbed shoulders in its elegant halls. But behind these magnificent doors lies a story of spectacular rise and tragic fall. Harry Selfridge, the retail genius who built this empire, led a double life that would ultimately destroy everything. By day, he was London's merchant prince, revolutionizing how we shop. By night, he transformed into a different person entirely, a gambling addict who couldn't resist the siren call of London's exclusive casinos. In today's episode, we'll share the story not just of a beautiful building or a revolutionary store, but a cautionary tale of how one man's secret obsession brought down not only his own future, but also shattered his children's inheritance, as we describe the Selfridges family. When your father gambles away your family's luxury story inheritance. Selfridges, the grand dame of London's legendary shopping capital, Oxford Street, first threw open its lavish doors on the 15th of March 1909, welcoming a staggering crowd of 150,000 eager shoppers. And Harry Gordon Selfridge, that audacious American entrepreneur with a flair for the dramatic, didn't just open a store. He transformed the dreary backwater of Oxford Street into London's sparkling retail mecca. Thus, between 1909 and 1929, Selfridges was revolutionizing the very act of shopping, and the store dared to toss out those stuffy glass cases that kept cosmetics and perfumes under lock and key. And the architectural masterpiece housing this behemoth was built by legendary Chicago architecture Daniel Burnham to the tune of tens of millions of dollars in today's money. Its steel frame construction created the perfect stage for window displays so mesmerizing they captured attention day and night, and the marketing simply dazzled. While Edwardian London still ran on gas lamps, Selfridges illuminated the evening sky with electric displays. He introduced seasonal sales to British shores, launched post-Christmas bargains, and brought Mother's Day to Britain. When Louis Blériot made history crossing the Channel, his aircraft found its temporary home inside the store. Furthermore, the social impact proved remarkable. The store's restaurant served 2,000 distinguished guests daily, including ladies dining alone, quite the sophisticated statement for the era. During the Great War, it became an elegant hub where families gathered to read war updates and write to their soldiers. And today, Selfridges arguably maintains its crown. The Oxford Street flagship welcomes 15 million visitors yearly, generating $1.1 billion in sales as of 2019. Yet, Harry Selfridge, the retail genius who created this empire, would ultimately become his own worst customer, developing an insatiable appetite for gambling and high-stakes games. And the man who taught London how to shop would end up selling his controlling interest in the company for a fraction of its worth, spending his twilight years as a familiar figure shuffling along Oxford Street, gazing up at the windows of the empire he'd lost. In the harsh winter of 1858, in a small wooden house on the outskirts of Ripon, Wisconsin, a child was born who would transform the very nature of retail commerce. The date was January 11th, and the boy, Harry Gordon Selfridge, entered a world where the echoes of frontier life still resonated through the wooden-planked streets of this Mississippi River town. But to understand the forces that shaped this man, this future architect of modern shopping, one must first understand the intimate geography of absence that defined his earliest years. When Robert Selfridge, Harry's father, abandoned his family in the aftermath of the Civil War, he left behind more than just a wife and 3 children. He left a void that would create an insatiable hunger in young Harry, a constant need to prove himself that would drive him to unprecedented heights, and ultimately contribute to his spectacular fall. The abandonment shaped not just Harry's childhood, but the very architecture of his ambitions. So, the true foundation of Harry Selfridge's education in survival came not from his absent father, but from his mother, Lois. Here was a woman who defied the rigid social constraints of post-Civil War America, and in an era when widowed and abandoned women often faced destitution, Lois Selfridge refused to accept the limitations society placed upon her. She secured a position as a teacher, then rose to become a school principal, achievements that, in the 1860s, marked her as a woman of extraordinary determination. Young Harry watched, absorbed, and learned. There, in their modest home, where every penny was counted twice, and where every meal represented his mother's triumph over circumstance, he received his first lessons in the art of perseverance. Thus, the boy who would later dazzle London society learned first to appreciate the dignity of work, the importance of presentation, and the power of refusing to accept defeat. At 14, an age when more fortunate boys still attended school, Harry Selfridge approached the imposing facade of a local bank. The position he secured there, through sheer force of will and personality, provided more than just an income. It offered an education in the mechanics of money, in the psychology of those who possessed it, and in the subtle art of persuasion that would later serve him so well. But it was his entry into Marshall Fields in 1876, that vast emporium of consumer desire in Chicago, that truly began to shape his understanding of human nature and commerce. Starting as a stockboy, earning $6 a week, Selfridge studied not just the merchandise, but the subtle dance between desire and fulfillment that drove successful retail. Within 2 years, his insights and innovation earned him management of the handkerchief department, a promotion that revealed not just his aptitude, but his ability to transform simple transactions into theater. Over the next quarter century, under the direct tutelage of Marshall Field himself, Selfridge refined his understanding of retail psychology. Field's famous dictum, "Give the lady what she wants," became more than a slogan to young Selfridge. It became a framework for understanding human desire itself. Through successive innovations, the bargain basement in 1885, the department store restaurant in 1887, the countdown to Christmas campaign in 1890, Selfridge demonstrated an almost uncanny ability to anticipate and shape consumer behavior. By 1891, the stock boy had become a junior partner, commanding an annual salary of $50,000, a fortune equivalent to $1.5 million today. But even this remarkable ascent wasn't enough to satisfy the ambition born in that small house in Ripon. Thus, when Selfridge visited London in 1906, he saw not just a city, but an opportunity, a chance to transform not just a business, but an entire society's relationship with commerce. In the dawn hours of the 15th of March 1909, as workers made final adjustments to the gleaming brass fixtures of London's newest retail establishment, Harry Gordon Selfridge stood at the building's massive entrance, contemplating the transformation of not just a street, but an entire society's relationship with commerce. The structure before him represented more than the £400,000 of capital he had assembled. It embodied a singular vision of what shopping could become in the still rigid social hierarchy of Edwardian London. The path to this moment had begun in 1904, when Selfridge departed Marshall Fields with a fortune and an idea. But money alone couldn't build empires. Understanding this fundamental truth, Selfridge meticulously cultivated relationships with Chicago's wealthiest socialites, transforming them from mere customers into investors in his vision. Each handshake, each dinner party, and each carefully orchestrated meeting added another thread to the financial web he was weaving. The selection of Oxford Street, then a decidedly unfashionable address, revealed Selfridge's deeper understanding of urban transformation. Land prices were lower here, yes, but more importantly, the location sat at the confluence of multiple transportation lines. And Selfridge had studied the flow of London's population, understanding that retail success depended not just on what you sold, but on the mechanics of how customers reached your door. The building itself represented a revolution in British architectural engineering. Daniel Burnham, the Chicago architect who had reshaped the skyline of America's fastest-growing city, brought steel-frame construction techniques that were virtually unknown in British retail architecture. The massive plate glass windows, unprecedented in size for their time, transformed the very relationship between store and street, between commerce and public space. Those windows would become stages where Selfridge would direct elaborate theatrical productions of consumer desire. Inside, Selfridge orchestrated a transformation of retail culture that went far beyond mere shopping. The marketing campaign alone, £36,000 worth of carefully crafted messages, represented more than many stores' annual revenue. But the true revolution lay in the details. Cosmetics displayed openly on counters, breaking centuries of social taboo. Restaurants serving thousands daily in an environment where women could dine unchaperoned. Demonstrations of scientific wonders that transformed shopping into education and entertainment. Throughout the 1910s and into the early 1920s, Selfridge's innovations penetrated every aspect of retail operations. The store's customer service philosophy dismantled traditional barriers between social classes. Personal shopping services, once reserved for aristocracy, became available to the rising middle class. The Information Bureau, a concept Selfridge invented, transformed the store into a hub of urban life, where one could book theatre tickets, arrange travel, or simply learn about the day's events. The rooftop garden, opened in 1911, exemplified Selfridge's understanding that retail success required more than mere transactions. Here, fashion shows mingled with concerts, society gatherings with public entertainments. In winter, a ski slope drew crowds, while in summer, the space hosted demonstrations of the latest technological marvels. Each event, each innovation, served to weave the store more deeply into the fabric of London life. By 1914, when annual revenue exceeded £2 million Great British pounds, Selfridges had become more than a store. It was a symbol of modernity itself. The profit of £375,000 thus validated not just a business model, but a revolutionary approach to understanding human nature and desire. Harry Gordon Selfridge had not simply built a department store. He had created an institution that would reshape the very nature of urban life and consumer culture in 20th century Britain. Yet, simultaneously, in the dim light of London's exclusive gambling clubs, a chair always remained empty, awaiting its regular occupant. As Wall Street trembled and fortunes crumbled across the Atlantic, life in London's exclusive gambling establishments continued unabated. Yet, at the same time, London's exclusive gambling clubs always held a separate empty seat, awaiting a consistent customer to show up and sit down. Harry Gordon Selfridge had become as familiar a presence at the high-stakes tables as he once was in his grand Oxford Street store. The man who had once calculated retail profits down to the penny now watched thousands of pounds disappear with each turn of a card, each spin of a wheel. And the daily losses, £5,000, equivalent to around £300,000 in today's currency, revealed not just a gambling addiction, but the unravelling of an empire. But the transformation from retail genius to compulsive gambler didn't happen overnight. Like the gradual erosion of a mighty riverbank on the Thames, Selfridges' descent into financial ruin came through a series of seemingly disconnected decisions, each one pushing him closer to the edge. The numbers tell the story. By 1931, in the span of just 5 years, he had squandered over £1 million on the Dolly sisters alone, twin dancers whose hypnotic hold over the aging merchant proved as destructive as any addiction. The relationship with the Dolly sisters illustrated a fundamental shift in Selfridges' character. The man who had once understood the psychology of desire better than anyone now became its victim. When Jenny Dolly lost £40,000 in a single night, Selfridges' response, paying the debt without hesitation, demonstrated how completely his once legendary business acumen had deserted him. The gifts flowed endlessly, matching automobiles, jewelry, even covering their own gambling debts. Each expenditure represented not just money lost, but the erosion of a lifetime's work. As the Great Depression tightened its grip on Britain's economy, Selfridges' personal financial crisis accelerated. The sequence of events became a case study in denial, borrowing against his store shares, selling properties, yet maintaining a staff of servants he could no longer afford. Lansdowne House, his beloved mansion, slipped away, but still he refused to acknowledge the inevitability of his decline. The board of directors at Selfridges' store watched this deterioration with growing alarm. In 1939, the numbers could no longer be ignored. By 1941, the man who had revolutionized British retail found himself stripped of his chairmanship, reduced to a pension of £2,000 per year, a sum that would barely have covered one of his previous evening's gambling losses. In the final years, Selfridges' daily routine took on a tragic rhythm. From his modest flat in Putney, he would make the journey to Oxford Street, standing outside the store that bore his name, watching customers enter and exit through doors that were no longer his to open. The staff, those who remembered his glory days, would occasionally invite him in for tea, a courtesy extended to a man who had once commanded an empire of commerce. When Harry Gordon Selfridge died in 1947, his estate totaled £4,000. The mathematical progression from his peak wealth of £65 million to this final sum represented more than just financial failure. It charted the complete inversion of a life's achievement. His burial at St. Mark's Church in Highcliffe, beside his wife Rose, marked the end of a journey that had begun with such promise in that small Wisconsin town. Soon, his descendants would have to pick up the fallen pieces from the casino store, so to speak. The dissolution of the Selfridge fortune rippled through the next generation like aftershocks from an earthquake. Each child's story represented a different aspect of privilege lost, of expectations suddenly and irrevocably altered. Rosalie, the eldest, embodied the family's attempt to maintain dignity amid decline. Her marriage to Prince Alexander Wiasemski had seemed to secure her position in society, but as her father's empire crumbled, she found herself selling family heirlooms to meet basic expenses. Her loyalty to her father never wavered. She became his lifeline in those final years, managing his meager pension with the same care he had once applied to millions. Violette's trajectory perhaps best illustrated the family's dramatic reversal. Her wedding to French nobleman Jacques de Cibourg had represented the pinnacle of Anglo-American social ambition, a ceremony that commanded headlines across 2 continents. Yet, the eventual dissolution of that marriage forced her to confront a new reality. Living to age 99, she witnessed not just the end of her own privileged existence, but the transformation of an entire social order. Her later years served as an example of how completely wealth and position could vanish within a single generation. Harry Gordon Selfridge Jr., Gordon to family and friends, carried the heaviest burden of expectation. Trained from youth to assume control of the retail empire, he possessed neither his father's innovative spirit nor his natural grasp of human psychology. By the 1950s, the heir to one of retail's greatest fortunes, could be found operating a modest bookshop in London, his transformation from presumptive retail magnate to small businessman marking the final chapter in the family's commercial ambitions. Beatrice, the youngest, experienced perhaps the most profound displacement. Her marriage to Serge de Bolotov dissolved, leaving her to navigate the harsh realities of post-war Britain with diminishing resources. Like her siblings, she watched the family name transition from symbol of retail innovation to cautionary tale. The final irony emerged in 2021, when Selfridges sold for £4 billion to a Thai conglomerate. The store Harry Selfridge built had become more valuable than ever, yet his descendants, working ordinary jobs, living ordinary lives, remained disconnected from the fruit of their grandfather's vision. Their story represented more than the loss of a fortune. It demonstrated how quickly the distance between extraordinary and ordinary circumstances could be traversed, how 3 generations could span the gap from creation to collapse to obscurity. The year is 1993. We find ourselves within the majestic confines of Gucci's historic headquarters. Maurizio Gucci, the calculating successor of a splendid fashion legacy spanning over 60 years, stands at the precipice of a heart-rending decision. He once tactfully maneuvered through family intrigues and power plays, as if a lead actor in a Shakespearean tragedy's third act. Today, however, he faces a daunting task, relinquishing his perceived birthright. In the austere boardroom, Maurizio, aged 46, is painstakingly conducting negotiations for the sale of the Gucci name to Investcorp, a globally recognized Bahrain-based management firm. The resonant echoes of his flamboyant spending, impulsive life choices, and costly marriage fill the tense air, serving as harsh reminders of why he must surrender the Gucci legacy. This poignant scene mirrors a common narrative for old money fashion dynasties. Surprisingly, the designer label adorning your attire or luxury handbag is often no longer owned by the namesake family. Today, on Old Money Luxury, we delve into the tragic sagas of why and how old money fashion families lose their luxury empires. Fashion's family dynasties have a rich and storied history, with the concept of old money in the industry stretching back to the 19th and early 20th centuries. These families built their fortunes in an era of rapid industrialization and societal transformation, leveraging their unique skills, creativity, and business acumen to establish what would become some of the world's most renowned luxury fashion houses. Prominent examples of old money fashion families include the Guccis, the Pradas, the Versaces, and the Fendis. These dynasties have not just shaped fashion trends across generations, but they have also wielded significant influence on global culture, lifestyle, and luxury consumer behavior. Their impact extends beyond the catwalk. They've had an indelible effect on the art world, film industry, and high society circles. When everything is going well, being a family-run business in fashion brings numerous advantages. There's often a deep-seated understanding and passion for the craft passed down through generations, fostering a sense of continuity and tradition that can strongly resonate with consumers. Moreover, these businesses tend to have long-term visions, a factor that often translates into a more sustainable business approach. Indeed, much like the dynasties of royal hereditary monarchs around the world, successful family transitions are integral to these old money fashion dynasties. For instance, the Hermès family has managed to maintain control of their brand across 5 generations, with a clearly defined succession plan that has allowed them to retain their brand's distinct identity. Similarly, Chanel has kept the brand's legacy alive despite the passing of its founder, thanks to the foresight and talent of the late Karl Lagerfeld. However, maintaining a family-run fashion house isn't without its challenges. Family control often comes with its fair share of internal dynamics that can threaten the stability of the business. Disputes over control, diverging visions for the brand, or even a lack of interest from younger family members in taking the reins can result in instability. Let us now describe 3 key examples of just how these dynamics can savagely wrench an old money fashion family's namesake from their duly deserved next generations. In the movingly romantic streets of 1850s Paris, Louis Vuitton, a visionary craftsman, transformed his passion for luggage making into a thriving enterprise. His obsession with exquisite craftsmanship quickly enamored the Parisian elite, and the humble shop's reputation burgeoned into a symbol of opulence, setting the stage for a luxury travel revolution. Under the astute guidance of Louis's son, Georges Vuitton, the brand unfurled its wings globally. A potent mix of innovation and tradition birthed masterpieces like the iconic monogram canvas, entrenching Louis Vuitton as an emblem of elegance and affluence. However, as the decades ticked into the 1970s and 80s, the gilded brand began to tarnish. The market swelled with counterfeit Vuitton products, shadowing the brand's exclusivity with a veil of reproducibility. The ambitious venture into ready-to-wear collections, although initially a triumph, soon turned into a battleground against relentless competition and fickle fashion trends. At the helm of the chaos was Henri Rassamier, husband to Louis Vuitton's great-granddaughter. He seized control in 1977, steering the brand towards growth. Yet the familial ties weaving the brand together began to unravel as Rassamier's vision clashed with the others. Family disputes over the company's trajectory, set against the backdrop of intensifying competition, birthed a maelstrom of internal turmoil and management missteps. Confronted with this perfect storm, the Vuitton family made a heart-wrenching decision. In 1987, they sold Louis Vuitton to the spirits conglomerate Moet Hennessy, birthing the powerhouse LVMH, thus leading to the rise of the world's richest man, the almighty monarch of modern fashion, Bernard Arnault. If you're curious about the backstory of the Arnault family dynasty and the current competition to helm that $500 billion luxury empire, click the card on screen to watch our recent deep dive into that intoxicating tale of fashion intrigue. Of course, the Vuitton family's loss to the LVMH labyrinth was a bitter pill to swallow, with emotional ties and the family's storied history, with the brand adding a sting to the sale. But the harsh reality of economic pressures and family dynamics left them no choice. The Vuittons found themselves marooned post-acquisition, their once powerful influence dwindling to a whisper. Lucky for them, however, the loss of their namesake would not, at least not yet, be the subject of a huge Hollywood blockbuster film, showcasing the tragic loss of the company and death of one of the family's key members. That unfortunate reality would be the story of our next old money fashion family to lose their luxury empire. The riveting narrative of the Gucci family is one of humble beginnings, ascension to dizzying heights, and an eventual devastating collapse. The prologue unfolds in 1921, with the industrious Italian artisan Guccio Gucci launching a modest leather goods shop in the heart of Florence. Over decades, this unassuming endeavor metamorphosed into one of the most esteemed luxury fashion icons globally. The golden age of Gucci emerged in the 1950s and 60s, buoyed by celebrity endorsements and high-profile patronage. A pivotal chapter was inscribed in 1953 when Jackie Kennedy, the era's unparalleled fashion muse, was photographed clutching a Gucci bag during her husband's presidential inauguration. This defining moment not only cemented Gucci's foothold in America, but also projected the brand onto the global stage. In tribute, the bag was fittingly renamed the Jackie. However, the glittering sheen of success began to tarnish as time marched into subsequent decades. Family discord, managerial missteps, and ill-judged business choices corroded the brand's image and profitability. The Gucci family's stronghold on their empire began to crumble in the 1980s, when the Gucci siblings found themselves ensnared in a bitter power struggle, their personal battles spilling over into lawsuits that further dented the brand. Amidst this tumultuous storm, the family could do little to stem the ebbing profits and surging debts. By the late 1980s, the brutal reality had set in. They needed to sell Gucci to Investcorp, a Bahrain-based investment firm. The aftermath was a total loss of the brand for the Gucci family. Maurizio Gucci, the final family member at the helm, was compelled to offload his remaining shares in 1993, marking the definitive end of the Gucci family's reign. The tragedy was amplified with Maurizio's sudden death in 1995 and his ex-wife's subsequent conviction for orchestrating his murder, a macabre epilogue to a tale of luxury and loss. Of course, at this point, it should go without saying that if you're fascinated by this topic, the Guccis and even more fashion empires, you must watch the incredibly riveting film House of Gucci, featuring Oscar-worthy dramatizations of this saga. Truth be told, anything with Lady Gaga and/or Adam Driver in it is worth seeing, regardless of the topic. Now, the Gucci saga epitomizes the dangerous cocktail of internal family feuds, ineffective management, and lack of succession planning that can precipitate the downfall of even an internationally acclaimed family business like Gucci. However, interestingly, Gucci itself, as a brand not by the Gucci family, would purchase the next family name we will discuss, swallowing up the last pieces of a brilliant brand that, to this day, is marked by cutting-edge influence and fashion prowess. The captivating tale of the Saint Laurent family unfurls with the birth of Yves Saint Laurent, a prodigiously talented young man who, at the tender age of 21, would take the reins of the esteemed House of Dior, following Christian Dior's sudden death in 1957. In the turbulent 1960s, Saint Laurent decided to part ways with Dior to establish his own fashion house. Backed by his partner, Pierre Berge, Yves Saint Laurent quickly gained a reputation for his groundbreaking designs. From Lee smoking suit to the sheer blouse, challenging societal norms and transforming the landscape of women's fashion. Saint Laurent's meteoric ascent was not without its tribulations, however. Struggles with addiction and the pressures of his high-profile position began to take a toll on his physical and mental health. Yet the Saint Laurent brand persisted, its star rising ever higher in the firmament of global fashion. However, the lustrous veneer began to show cracks as the decades advanced. Financial difficulties, partly due to a tumultuous market and the increasing costs of maintaining an haute couture line, began to erode the empire's foundations. In the late 1990s, in a plot twist that even Ridley Scott's direction couldn't find time to fit into a film, the decision was made to sell the brand to none other than the so-called Gucci Group, now a part of Kering conglomerate. With the sale, Yves Saint Laurent and Pierre Berge lost direct control over the fashion house they'd built, although they remained involved in the haute couture line until Yves' retirement in 2002. After Saint Laurent's death in 2008, Berge became the custodian of his legacy, overseeing the preservation and exhibition of Yves' designs in their jointly established foundation. Yet the brand itself moved forward under new stewardship, shepherded by successive creative directors such as Tom Ford, Stefano Pilati, and Hedi Slimane, who continued to reinterpret Yves' iconic designs for a new generation. And now, it's your turn to share your thoughts in the comments. Which sector of old money wealthy families would you like us to cover next? If you're ready to learn more about old money families in fashion, as mentioned before, simply click the video on screen to hear about the richest family in fashion, the Arnauds. And we'll see you next time, here at Old Money Luxury. Ta-ta for now.